right, let's jump in. So episodes 3 and 4 were pretty good, very informative, and I liked a lot that they focused some on Dennis Rodman because of his importance to the team, and it also highlighted some of his accomplishments as a player. And I certainly want to talk about those, but I love the fact that they spent some time talking with Rodman. Yes, I do remember you. Absolutely. So I was very happy about Rodman having some shine and having some focus, and them talking about the team dynamic as well and breaking that down. And I remember that time when Rodman went on that vacation, and, certainly we talked about this last week, one of those advantages for playing in a time where we were at the advent of social media, I think really benefited Dennis Rodman because he was able to go and enjoy himself and recharge his batteries in the way that he did, without a lot of fanfare, without a lot of spotlight on him and on the things that he was doing to blow off steam, whatever those things were. And so that is certainly something that if that were to happen today, we talk about when there was a time earlier, a couple of years ago with LeBron where, he took a vacation in the middle of the season or went to Miami when he needed some time off to nurse an injury. And people just, it's almost as if they had a conniption about that. So certainly different times. And again, I referenced that earlier, MJ and all the players in that era sort of live without the pressures of social media or the fact that everybody has a camera phone, which in essence makes everybody a member of the paparazzi. So everything that you do can be recorded. Everything that you do, people can take a picture of. So in those days, it was always, your word against that player's word, and certainly easier for those players during that time. So it was good to see that, good that they talked about that, and also talked about some of those things from a team element that really sort of influenced and shaped the Bulls, not only for that last dance, but as well as for the titles that they won previous to the last title. Proud history. What's going on? Appreciate you for joining. Brady, you'll have to tell me how your basketball journey is going also. So certainly wanted to talk about how, first I want to talk about Rodman and again, his impact on that team. And when you look at, he's the only player that sort of bridged that gap from that late 80s, early 90s Detroit team that was amazing to now the Bulls that ran the decade of the 90s. And it speaks to his longevity. It speaks to all the things that he did as a player that really made teams go. And again, was happy that he was able to get some attention and get some shine because he's an amazing player. And again, there are players today that the fact that they were able to make the living that they made as defensive players and rebounders, they owe that to Dennis Rodman. And because of all the things that he did off the floor to bring attention to his play on the floor, it's the primary reason why a lot of these rebounders, again, as the Ben Wallaces, the Tyson Chandlers, those players, it's the reason why they were able to get paid at the level that they got paid, because people started paying attention to the importance of having that dominant rebounder. And also Rodman as well was a great defender, and he did less of this in his Chicago days, but in his Detroit days, he could defend almost all the positions on the floor. And, when you start looking at his dominance as a rebounder, I really want to peel the onion and talk more about how he was able to become this dominant rebounder. Oftentimes, and I talk about this in my Hall of Fame series, I talk about this in my playoff breakdown series, you have these players and they're performing these superhuman feats, and they're doing this by actually working on their craft, and they are mastering the predictable. They're doing so people think that they're just showing up in Dennis Rodman's case, showing up and rebounding the way that he did, but he actually worked at it. There's an art to it. He referenced having his friends come in the gym and shoot the ball, and he going and looking at the trajectory of the ball and figuring out where the ball is going to go. So that was part of positional rebounding, was a big advantage that Dennis enjoyed. He also talked about how he studied his teammates, and he knew from the rotation of their shots where the ball would go. And what's going on, nephew? Where the balls would go, and he would retrieve the ball because of that. So this man worked at his craft. He took notes on all the players that he was guarding, so he knew their tendencies. So even though it looked as if he showed up to the gym and performed these superhuman feats, he actually worked at it. So that's one of the things that really resonated with me about Rodman. I knew that before we dove into it in the last 3 or 4 episodes of The Last Dance. And so the fact that he was able to push that message out and let everybody know the amount of work that it took for him to be great, it just really resonated with me, and I'm glad that he shared that. When I was working and scouting for the Boston Red Sox, we had a player by the name of Manny Ramirez who, when he was playing, he was one of the most feared right-handed hitters, or one of the most feared hitters in baseball. And just like Rodman, people thought that he sort of marched to the beat of his own drum, did his own thing, and was a player that really didn't invest in the work. And he just showed up and started doing that. And actually, if you were behind the scenes and you saw the work that Manny Ramirez put in, this man spent hours and hours and hours and hours of time in the hitting tunnel, working on his swing, perfecting his swing. And he didn't worry about what the pitchers were throwing. He just worried about perfecting his swing and mastering his performance. And obviously the results speak for itself. So you have these players who on the surface look like, hey, I'm just carefree. Whatever you guys want me to do, I'll do it. And in actuality, these players are working very, very hard at their craft to be the best at what they do. And so that was something that I certainly wanted to highlight and talk about with Dennis. And the other thing I want to talk about with him is how he was able to look at the talents of the other players around him, and he was able to take his game and he was able to sort of morph what he does around the talents that everybody else did. And so it made him one of the greatest, quote unquote, complimentary players that we've ever seen. And the crazy part about him being a complimentary player is this man was a star. And so we oftentimes talk about, especially from a scouting perspective, we talk about role players. And, that's a term that sometimes I don't like to use, because when we talk about role players, sometimes it sort of goes under the radar or underrepresented, the things that they do very well. And they actually become stars in their roles. So Dennis Rodman, even though he was a quote unquote role player, wasn't leading the league in scoring, and wasn't the second option from a scoring perspective for the Bulls, or for the most part, all of the teams that he played on, he actually became a star because he was a great defender. And he was also a great rebounder. And so he became a star in his role. And when you win championships and you watch championship caliber teams sort of go for that ring, the stars do what the stars do. And it doesn't matter if they are on a team, if Michael Jordan was on a team with Scottie Pippen, or Michael Jordan was on a team with a bunch of people playing at the playground. Michael Jordan was going to be that lethal scorer that he always is. And what catapulted him to that championship level is all of those quote unquote role players became stars in their role. John Paxson became a star as a shooter. Steve Kerr, B.J. Armstrong, shout out B.J., Craig Hodges, one of my favorite players. All of these players, and Craig Hodges is a 2-time three-point champion in the NBA at the All-Star game. So these guys became stars in their role. And Dennis obviously was the ultimate rebounder, the ultimate competitor, the ultimate defender. And he became a star in his role, even though he looked and said, okay, what is it that I can do that other people don't do? And becoming a star in that role actually catapulted his teams, Detroit and Chicago, to championships. So that should be certainly recognized. And one of the things that goes under the radar about Dennis Rodman is, even though one thing we should talk about is him not being a scorer, that was by choice. That wasn't because he wasn't skilled enough. And when you watch those Bulls teams that he was on, one of the things you would see is once or twice a game, Dennis would shoot a three, and he would make them, and sometimes he would miss them. But his form was picture perfect. This man could have been a scorer if he wanted to. And the empirical evidence is some of the games that he put up in Detroit and before he was moved to San Antonio, and he did a little bit of this in San Antonio as well. Dennis Rodman has multiple games where he scored 30 points and had 20 rebounds, 30 points and 16 rebounds, 18 points and 32 rebounds. So this is a man that could score the basketball if he wanted to. He just didn't want to. And he saw what all of the other players sort of concentrated on. And that was kind of the gift and the curse of MJ, where when Michael Jordan sort of emerged as this force on the NBA and on the world in general, so many players started to focus so much on scoring that they may have neglected the other areas of their game. And Dennis, to his credit, looked and said, you know what? I want to get credit as a defender and a rebounder. This is what I'm going to do. And because he did that, he made those teams go. And so, but I certainly want to really highlight and underscore the fact that this man was very, very skilled. And because he was skilled, he had that versatility to be able to do whatever it is that the team needed him to do. One of the other things, too, that's interesting to note about Dennis is we're living in this sort of branding world, or the emergence of the NBA player as a brand, largely because of Michael Jordan, is starting to really impact the world of basketball as we see it. And Dennis doing all of the things that he did because people weren't necessarily really paying attention to the importance of scoring, the importance of rebounding. Because people weren't doing that, Dennis branded himself. And yes, he started dating Madonna, which helped to brand himself. But as he branded himself, that's when people really started to pay attention to all of the things that he did on the floor. So if people would say, why does Dennis do all of these things that are considered outlandish? Well, the more he did those outlandish things, the more people started to recognize his importance as a player. And it's hard to tell someone hey, let's stay between the lines. Let's not do this. Let's not do that, when you're actually getting that adulation and that recognition that you're looking for and that you probably deserve by doing all of these things that bring attention to yourself. And as I said, him bringing attention to himself also brought attention to the rebounders and the defenders that we know today. So Dennis, again, in that branding, where obviously playing on a team that was, as they said, was a traveling rock band, they are establishing brands. And Scottie Pippen started to become a signature Nike athlete, meaning he had his own shoe. And the big thing that's really of note here is, as Michael Jordan has impacted people to pay attention to their branding before they get to the league, the thing that team understood, and the thing that the great players understand, is there is no brand without winning. So those guys, even though they were certainly concentrating on their brands, they knew that the ultimate way that you build your brand is through the winning. And they did whatever it took to win. That's including Scottie Pippen playing through trade rumors, playing through injuries, Dennis Rodman doing whatever he did and playing through that and showing up for the team. So I really wanted to underscore all the things that he did and how he found a way to really morph his game and to be with great players. And one of the other things I want to talk about with him as well is, to a certain extent, he's like Dennis Rodman is almost like the ultimate paradox in this regard. Here's a player that sort of found himself when he was trying to be an individual, but it's painfully clear that Dennis also, even though he was trying to be an individual and have that sovereignty and solid and have that, he also was longing to be part of a group. And again, it was part of his journey when he was in Detroit. As he started to change, one of the things that was interesting about him as a player is that Detroit group that he played on, and the Last Dance last night referenced this a little bit, but that Detroit group that he played for was like a family. And that was a family for Dennis. And he and Scotty shared this, coming from small colleges and not necessarily being concerned about branding because they didn't play at these huge universities that are brands themselves. Dennis wanted to be part of a family. And when they started to break the team up in Detroit and he started to emerge as a scorer, it also sort of worked against what he was longing for when he went to the NBA. And he started to see the business side of the NBA. And I think that affected Dennis a little bit. And then obviously he was moved to San Antonio when Detroit started rebuilding. And those are going toward the Grant Hill, Allen Houston, that group, those years. And so Dennis was starting to get slapped in the face, per se, by the business side of the NBA. And I think that had an effect on him. And even when he came to Chicago, he became more connected with the team when Scotty was out because the team needed him. Michael needed him. The team needed him. And when Scotty came back, Dennis sort of disconnected from the team again because I think he felt like he wasn't needed as much. So even though he wanted to be this individual, he still had this yearning inside of him to be part of something bigger than him. And to his credit, he was able to take his hiatus and come back and sort of regroup with the team and pick up where he left off. So one of the other things that I want to touch on about their team is their team in this era that we have now, where players are rightfully so concerned about the longevity of their careers, making sure that they are protected, making sure that their families are protected. Because as I was talking last week, this is certainly a business and you have to make sure that you are concerned about your longevity, because you have to place that first, because oftentimes the organization may not place your longevity first. So even though they were concerned about that, this team also placed a valuable emphasis on making sure that they weren't winning championships. And this sounds weird to say, but they weren't winning championships to represent the Chicago Bulls as an organization. They were winning championships to represent themselves as a group. And that's what great teams do. Again, they hold themselves accountable. They don't need the coaches. They don't need the organization to discipline them, or when they are lacking in some of the things, whether it's hustle. And Dennis, Michael alluded to this when Dennis felt like he went too far. And, there were times, as stories go, that when Dennis felt like he went too far, he would buy these amazing gifts for the players' wives. And some of the players thought, Dennis, you're outdoing us in terms of the gifts that you're giving to our wives. But that was his way of saying, okay, I went too far. And so he policed himself, and the team sort of policed themselves as well. So that winning really became the DNA of their team, and it permeated their approach. And that was one of the things, as they were trying to make sure that they were able to surpass Detroit and overcome that challenge. One of the things that was evident to me also is when you are a team and you are really trying to overcome this challenge, and you are trying to build a culture as a team, a winning culture. Sometimes organizations, and I'll put this in my in terms of my own career, sometimes organizations they can have a great culture, and they can try to add one player to that culture that may not be used to that accountability that comes with that great culture and great foundation. And sometimes organizations think that 12 players can change one. And the reality is actually, they think that that 12 players can change one player. And the reality is one player can actually change 12. And that can go both ways where you can. And so when you look at Michael and the things that they were doing to really combat and ultimately overcome Detroit, he changed their culture because of the fact that he was the hardest worker, the fact that he wanted to start to administer pain to Detroit instead of always looking to sustain and endure the pain that Detroit would dish out. He wanted to become the aggressor. To put it in terms of a Tupac song, the Bulls wanted to bomb first. And that's important because oftentimes you hear players talking about matching the intensity of a team that they're playing. No. You bomb first and you make them try to match your intensity. And that's what Michael referenced. And that's what the team did. As he changed his approach, everybody else changed. And again, sometimes that can go another way as well. And one of the things that when Dennis was acquired, one of the things that the assistant GM, Jim Stack, talked about was having that culture have a positive impact on Dennis Rodman. And they were able to sustain some of the things that Dennis did. And I can say I agree with that. I sort of don't agree with that in this regard, because that culture permeated by Michael Jordan's approach to the game and how fierce of a competitor he was, and how his competitive nature was the DNA for his preparation for the games. Dennis Rodman shared that. So they didn't change Dennis Rodman's approach to the game. That's how that man played. And if you are a person that multiple times in your career, you've averaged over 18 rebounds a game in a season, you don't need people to light the pilot and to make you play hard. Dennis Rodman already did that. So in essence, he fit into the things that Michael Jordan was already doing, and the things that Michael Jordan was trying to bring to the rest of the team. That approach to Scottie Pippen, that approach to Horace Grant, etc., as they were young players really trying to make their way in the league and try to be part of this championship contender. So Dennis's approach to the game and how he was, again, rebounding and defense are the ultimate attitude components of basketball. Those things don't take a lot of talent. What they do take is attitude, and they take want to. So Dennis already had that. And so I kind of disagree with them having to withstand Dennis Rodman, because Dennis Rodman naturally, and Chuck Daly talked about this, Dennis Rodman intrinsically, naturally, he was native to the platform of things that we call now, one of the terms that we talk about now is motor. You hear that a lot thrown about in the media when we're talking about players. Well, motor is grading how hard you play. And I say this all the time when I'm working with players, when I'm talking about players, when I'm scouting players. If a coach has to focus on how hard you play when they are evaluating you, if they have to focus on your motor, then you probably should find another sport. A coach will always willingly grade and look at how you're shooting the ball. Let's get your elbow in. Let's hold your follow through. All of those things. But if a coach has to grade how hard you play, and if a team has to worry about how hard you play, how much effort you bring, then that's a major, major problem, because it takes away focus from all the other things that you need to do to be successful as an individual and a player on the floor. So those things that Dennis did naturally, any team would love to have those things. So I don't know if you had to sustain or worry about Dennis once he got to the floor. And so I would like to say that he fit in with their culture. And it is a skill when you are looking to try to make the NBA as a player. One of the things that we see is, and I've said this before, when you are trying to be part of that 470 club, 470 players in the NBA, you are essentially have been the best player on practically every team that you played on. And I can say this as a player also, when you are the best player on every team that you play on, there's a certain mindset that goes with being the best player on every team that you compete on. And when you do that, and that's been your socialization, that's how you have been sort of formed in the game for your entire career, then you get to the NBA and you are not the best player on your team, and you have to find other ways to impact the team, because you may go to a team that has a prime example for us as we were trying to build through the draft. When I was with the Phoenix Suns, we had Devin Booker. Well, Devin Booker, when he was about to turn 20, Devin Booker had a 70-point game. So with that being said, as we're drafting young players, if you've been the best player on your team before you get to us, then now you come to our team, you're not going to be the number one option on the team. So how do you positively impact the game without necessarily looking with the team looking for you to be a primary scorer? And so Dennis was able to find his way and master his role and impact the game and always be a positive contributor. One of the things that I look at when I'm grading players is if we were to take the Olympic team and say, let's put it in the terms of Kobe Bryant, Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade, LeBron James. If we were to take those four players and put you on the floor with those four players, would we know that you're on the floor? Would you make an impact to the game? Would you make a positive impact on the game? And would you help your team win? And Dennis mastered being able, I guarantee you, if you put him on the floor with those four players, or with Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Scottie Pippen, and Patrick Ewing, or Shaquille O'Neal, take your pick. If you put Dennis Rodman on the floor with those four players, I would guarantee you that you would know that he's on the floor, because he's going to positively impact the game, and he's going to allow those other players to do the things that they do. So when you look at when the Bulls made that transition from running the offense that Doug Collins ran, that heavily featured Michael Jordan, I'm going to touch on that, and they started going to the triangle, Dennis was also a great fit in the triangle because he had great basketball awareness. This man could pass the ball. He knew where other players were on the floor. So Dennis was not only an incredible basketball talent, but he was also an incredible basketball mind. And he does not get the credit that he deserves for being the incredible basketball mind that he is. So certainly want to take some time, as I said, to talk about that transition from, and they reference this, from Doug Collins to Michael Jordan. And sometimes as players, we have to be saved from ourselves. Meaning, when you are a great player, or you are positively impacting the team as a scorer and that focal point, you become so consumed with making sure that you dominate the competition, that you place your imprint on the team, that the more that you do that, the more that you start to seek to do that. So Michael, with the impact that he had with Doug Collins, and, when he won the MVP, he led the league in triple doubles because Doug Collins put him at the point. And that was the same way that Doug Collins coached Grant Hill when Grant Hill was in Detroit, and Grant Hill was doing similar things. Keith, what's going on? And when you play that way and you're a great player, you want more of that, and you seek more and more. You become a sponge. You want more, you want more, you want more. And what actually ends up happening is you can beat a lot of teams playing that way. But when you start playing against great teams, and that operative word, the operative two words actually are great and teams. when you start playing against great teams, you have to make sure that you are empowering your team to be a great team. And that was one of the things that initially Michael resisted, because the Bulls were making those runs. And I remember vividly watching that, making those runs with Michael Jordan leading the league in assists, and with Michael Jordan averaging 37.1 points a game, and then also being Defensive Player of the Year, and being a league MVP, and being All-Star Game MVP, and winning the dunk contest. He did all of those things, and he wanted more, he wanted more, he wanted more, but he also wanted to make that transition from that criticism of, okay, all you do is put up numbers and you're not a winning player. So if he wanted to make that transition, he had to embrace and understand that he had to empower the other players on his team. And that's what, when Phil Jackson came, those are some of the things that Phil Jackson brought to the table as a head coach. And he started to get Michael Jordan to understand that he had to empower those other players to be vital parts of the team. Now, one of the other things is when you play on a team, and I referenced this last week, one of the reasons why the great Kobe Bryant said that Derek Fisher was his favorite teammate was because you can't allow that dominant force. You can't allow Thanos, Mike is Thanos. You can't allow him to buffalo you into not being a basketball player, because they have such an indomitable will that they will do that. And they are so great that you will become a spectator and you will watch. Well, that doesn't help your team win. And so you have to make sure that not only through the work will come the results. So you have to make sure that you are putting in that work as well, so you can produce and you can force that star to respect you as a player. And Kobe respected Derek Fisher because Derek Fisher is known for making big shots and big moments. A lot of those shots resulted from Kobe or someone making a great pass to Derek Fisher. And there were plays where Kobe or Michael were asking for the ball because they felt like, hey, I'm the first option. I can make something happen. And those players, the John Paxsons, the BJ Armstrongs, the Steve Kerrs, the Craig Hodges, where they would look at Michael and say, no, I'm open. I'm going to take the shot. So what that meant was, not only did you have to seek out those opportunities to make those shots, if you missed those shots, you also had to be willing to endure whatever Michael or Kobe or whatever that great player had to say if you missed that shot. So you can't allow them to punk you into being a less of a basketball player. And John Paxson hit big shots. Steve Kerr hit big shots. Obviously, Craig Hodges hit big shots. Derek Fisher hit big shots. And Tony Kukoc hit big shots. And the last game in '98, when Michael held the pose and they beat Utah, Tony Kukoc had 21 points in that game. So you just have to make sure that you stand your ground, and you have to put in that work, of course, but you have to make sure that you stand your ground and make sure that you prove yourself and you prove your worth as a player. Because again, as I referenced earlier, if you are going to win a championship, you have to make sure that those role players are the ones that are really catapulting you and pushing you to that title, because the great players are going to do what the great players are going to do. So again, one of the other things I want to talk about is Phil Jackson. And when Phil came, what he actually did when he started implementing the elements of the triangle, that empowered the other players from an offensive standpoint, that they were empowered now. But one of the things that he did to it that Phil is a master at, and a lot of people that criticize Phil Jackson say, well, he coached great players. And I don't know, it's very hard to find a team that's won championships or multiple championships that doesn't have great players. But when you are coaching great players, the biggest thing that you need to make sure that you achieve is buy-in from those great players. Because once you get that buy-in from those great players, that sets the culture and everybody else is forced to buy in. And Horace Grant referenced that when he said, I saw Michael doing the things that he did. I had to make sure that I did my part also. Same thing in San Antonio with Greg Popovich, who's a great coach, and what the things that San Antonio does from an organizational standpoint. But they were able to set that culture through deferential Hall of Fame caliber talents that had deferential personalities in David Robinson and Tim Duncan. And so what Phil did was, and Greg Popovich is a master at this as well, and what Phil did was getting that buy-in from those great players. And to the point where Michael said, hey, if Phil's not here, this is the greatest player in the world. Phil's not here, I'm not going to play. And what Phil did was he got outside of himself and he found elements within his personality and within the journey, the personal journey of all of the players that play for him. And he looked and said, how do I find a way to connect with them where they presently are, which will then get them to stretch themselves as professionals and do things that they may not feel like they can do now. So Phil did that in a multitude of ways. Obviously, in Native American culture, he connected with Dennis Rodman that way. Phil also would do things like giving players individual books, and they were different books for different players. And it really talked about where that player was as a player, where he was as a person. And what that communicates to the player is, you care about me more than just basketball. And so in turn, since the players know that you care about me as an individual, what you then get is buy-in. Whatever that coach now asks that player to do, that player will do. So when now Phil was saying, I need Michael to function as a facilitator and empower his teammates as well, now Michael Jordan willingly did that because Phil made that personal connection with Michael. And I remember times during multiple seasons where Phil would be in the huddle drawing up plays. The Bulls are down, and these are regular season games where the Bulls are down, and Phil is saying, it's too early for Michael to come and save the day. We need to empower these other players because at some juncture during our run, at some juncture during our journey, we're going to need these other players to contribute. And so, and that also manifested itself. I remember in the 92 finals where the Bulls were playing the Trailblazers, and in the game where they actually clinched the championship in Game 6, the Bulls were down. It was the Trailblazers had a double-digit lead on the Bulls with Michael Jordan on the bench, and Bobby Hansen and a host of other players, Craig Hodges, etc. Those players were responsible for igniting the run, and then Michael came in and finished off the Blazers. Well, that doesn't happen if the coach and the system doesn't empower those other players in moments smaller than the championships, so they actually had been there before. And so there were times in the regular season where the Bulls would be down. Phil wouldn't call a timeout, wouldn't put Michael and Scottie back in the game. The bench players have to figure it out. And those moments actually catapulted the Bulls to doing those great things. And then you have the ultimate finisher in Michael Jordan coming home and finishing it out. So those are a lot of the elements that really resonated with me. Things that I like to talk about, things that I noticed while I was watching episodes 3 and 4 of The Last Dance. And I know I talked a lot, Hoop Fam. If anybody has any questions, I'm here. I'm willing to answer them. I would love to hear what you guys thought about this as well, if anybody has anything. Nope. Well, I appreciate it, Hoop Fam. We will do this again next Monday, or you all tell me if you guys would rather we do it right after the episodes. I'm certainly open to that as well. So whichever format, whichever way is more comfortable for you all, I'm certainly willing to do. I try to make sure that while I am doing these that I don't watch the First Take. I don't watch Undisputed. All of these shows that feature these. Appreciate you, Scott. Yes, sir. Appreciate it. That all of these shows that feature these points, especially now since we don't have any sports, and these are the only things that are going on. I try to make sure that I don't watch these shows, so my perspective isn't colored by the things that they're talking about and their perspective. I really like to talk about this from my perspective as a player, my perspective as a scout, my perspective working in branding, all of the things that sort of make me feel the way that I feel when I watch these things. And I certainly appreciate you all joining me and you all watching. This is amazing. I love it. I want to continue having these. And Who Fam, we'll see you next week. I appreciate you all. You all stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you.